Hello, I'm Arthur Malman, the host for GGG Insights. And joining us again for a second segment is Perry Gershon, the Democratic candidate in the 1st District. As I said in the first interview, we made an offer to both Perry Gershon and Lee Zeldin, the Republican candidate, asking them to come and join us for one or two segments. This is our second with Perry, and we hope that Lee takes the same opportunity to be with all of us. Perry, in the first segment, we were talking about how you really put together what I'll call the ground game to get people out in the primary. And what you started talking about were things that an old dinosaur like me doesn't really know. I mean, I never realized there were all these alternate ways of reaching people through Hulu and YouTube, and those are things that I thought you just pressed the button to see the commercials where you saw the funny stuff from Saturday Night Live. And I just didn't realize that. And also, my wife did some sign-ups, and I know how hard it is to get people to really follow through. But now you've got this massive problem of getting 160,000 Democrats off the couch and onto the street. And how is that going to get done? Is there somebody in your campaign who's really the commander-in-chief of that army? Because it takes an army to get that many people contacted.
Yes, it's decentralized, but at the same, because we have different district offices by town, but it's also centralized. We have, my campaign manager is a guy who ran one of the Virginia House of Delegate races, and he does a tremendous job with the field organizers, just keeping everybody motivated and focused. And then we have an outside firm that helps us as well, North Shore Strategies, to give them the plug.
Give them a plug.
And they all just do a great job of communicating with voters. We've knocked on 150,000 doors to date, which is a big number in this area.
When you say that you knocked on 150,000 doors, did those doors all open? Or?
No.
Okay.
I don't know what the connect number is.
Probably 1/5 of that.
No, it's probably more than that, but it's
that's a lot of people, though.
We've connected with a lot of people. We've gotten over 30,000 postcards from people saying they pledged to vote for me.
Oh wow!
So
I never thought you'd get postcards back.
One of the things our door knockers do, if they meet someone who says they want to vote for you, we have them fill out a postcard, and we mail it right before Election Day, so they get the little reminder to go out and vote. And we've had postcard writing, this is more what you're thinking of, postcard writing parties that people have in their house, and they have a bunch of people over to write postcards, and then we mail those, and those are just to supplement the regular direct mail. And we give out lists of addresses to send the postcards to. But going back to what you were saying about the digital with YouTube and Hulu and other digital advertising methods, what I found the most interesting is that you can hyper-target them. So you can not only say you only want to hit people in the zip code, but you can say you only want to hit people in this assembly district who have voted in the last 5 elections.
Wow.
And you can really, really narrow the...
So your cost benefit is tremendous. I mean,
your cost benefit is tremendous, but and I like to make people laugh. So the joke here is that if you're me or my wife, we're not spending to target us, but we never see it. So we're like, well, where's the money going? Why aren't I seeing this ad? And a lot of my strong supporters, specifically not the people we want to target, so they don't see the ads.
Oh, so what really happens, I guess, is if you found a person who was registered as a Democrat, who voted in the presidential, and who voted in the prior midterm election, that person would get relatively little new material because you're expecting them to come out.
Yes.
Whereas the person who voted maybe in the presidential but never voted in the last 2 or 3 midterms is really where you're spending your money. I mean,
yes.
It's interesting.
And we're targeting that occasional voter.
And the fact that you could target that precisely is something that, again, boggles my mind here.
We're also targeting certain constituency groups that we think are likely to vote Democratic if they vote. So the Latino community is one. If we can elevate Latino turnout, that's likely to help our campaign.
Well, Perry, one of the things that I've always heard, and I found this myself, GGG at its very beginning had a real effort, which we still do, to get people to register and then to vote. But first you got to register before everything else. And what I found was it was very difficult to get people in the Latino community to even register and also to vote. And there were two reasons. One was that they were afraid, somebody else in the family wasn't here legally. But the other was there were, in their historical background, when you were in Ecuador and you voted, that wasn't a good thing unless you voted for the right guy. Because if you didn't vote for the right guy, your business would have a flood or a fire. And so they were turned off by the whole process. And getting these people engaged is a hard thing to do.
I think you're right. The best way to get them engaged for us, and not anything we did, but Donald Trump's
he's been very helpful.
Policies show people who never thought their vote mattered that, well, maybe my vote does matter. So that's one of the big drivers. The hardest thing we find with immigrants is that there are many homes that are populated by documented immigrants and non-documented immigrants.
That's a real problem.
And the documented ones don't want to attract attention to the undocumented.
Right.
And it's a myth that this Republican talking point that there's voter fraud and undocumented people are voting. That's just not true. There's no evidence to back that up.
No, that's one of the great myths of our time. Even as a registered Republican, I know that's a great myth of our time. But let's just focus on some of the issues that affect people here. As you know, everybody in East Hampton is involved with the airport. Either you're flying in, you're flying out, or or worst case is you're living under it. And
that's the greater case.
That's the greater case. I happen to be the chairman of the town's airport committee, which unfortunately lets me realize that the incoming flights to the airport from the southern route on helicopters fly directly over my house. So I know exactly how many airplanes are coming in or helicopters are coming in from the south. And the reality we have here is the FAA controls the game. And have you given any thought to how the towns, both East Hampton and Southampton and North Fork, were all affected by the airport noise, primarily the helicopters especially? What can be done on a national level that isn't being done? There was a recent bill, or actually a law passed recently, where Lee Zeldin brought this out. The provision of the reauthorization bill for the FAA said that they were required to investigate how helicopters are landing in East Hampton, and especially giving consideration to what they called the southern route of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, obviously, since I live under the southern route over the Atlantic Ocean, that made me very nervous. Have you followed this issue at all, and what are your positions on it?
I have followed it, and I'm going to give Zeldin credit. I think the idea of having an FAA hearing and forcing it specifically on our issue is a plus for everybody who lives here. And you should give people credit for the good things they do. I don't think that's a reason you should vote for him because he's done a lot of bad things like voting to take away people's health care, voting to allow concealed weapons to come into New York State, really voting to hurt the environment, not protecting it. I mean, to me, those are more troubling things, but definitely he should get credit for what he did with the airport. And the thing about the airport, the issue is not new. It's gotten worse because there are more helicopters.
More helicopters,
But we have a local airport, and we should have more control over it. It's not right that the federal government has as much control as they do. We're treated in some ways like we're a commercial airport. And the rules and regulations that they apply to us are the rules that would apply for commercial, but we don't have commercial. So the government's not doing the right thing, and you get a hearing, that's good. You need to get people motivated, and I hope something good comes out of it.
Another issue, obviously, of great local consequence is the offshore wind farm, and obviously there were some differences of opinion, at least in East Hampton town. 3 of the town board members voted essentially to go forward and give the wind farm people the right to come into Wainscott, and 2 basically felt that you should know more before you make a decision. And the whole wind issue is something that I'm sure you've talked about and you've thought about. And where do you come out on that?
Let's start at the top. I'm a very, 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 I'll give you 3 varies.
3 varies? Okay.
Strong proponent of offshore wind. I think it is the renewable energy technology that can deliver the most power to the east end of Long Island. I mean, solar is great. We should do everything we can to encourage solar. In my opinion, every new house that gets built should have solar panels on it, and they're doing that in California. We should require that here. But solar is not enough to power us, and coal and other fossil fuels have significant issues, and oil. So if we can use offshore wind to supplement solar, it's a great option. And there's a big coast, and we have the ability to put the offshore wind far enough away that you won't see it. So I like all of that. And it's not just here. The entire coastline can and probably one day will have offshore wind. And when that happens, we could potentially be building the turbines for the offshore windmills here on Long Island. It's a great way to reinvigorate our manufacturing economy. And organized labor has figured that out and is pushing for it. And I find it fascinating to see organized labor and the environmentalists on the same page.
Same side, yeah.
When we were growing up, that never happened. But the uniqueness of the Deepwater project here is transparency, or lack thereof.
Lack thereof is unfortunate. Yeah.
We, on Long Island, already had Shoreham happen to us, where we didn't know the financial deal, and we're still paying the bill for a nuclear power plant we're not using. So there are all kinds of dangers in a non-transparent arrangement. And it would seem very simple to fix it and just let the details out. And for whatever reason, that's not happening. So that makes it hard if you're a town councilman to decide how to vote. And I think 2 of the councilmen voted that without the transparency, they couldn't go for it. And the other 3 said, regardless of the lack of transparency, the need from an environmental point of view should win out. It would have been great to find something in the middle there where we can get the transparency and still get the offshore wind. I don't think the town council, unfortunately, was the right body to be making that decision. Obviously, it wasn't. And if they had defeated the project, it was just for the access of the cable.
Correct.
So the cable, they would have simply gone to Southampton and gotten.
Well, what they could do is they could go out to Heather Hills Park and come ashore there in the state land, and then go along the railroad right away, which probably cost them an extra few $1 million. So they'd rather do it the simple way, which is through Wainscott. But
it wasn't going to kill the project.
It wasn't gonna kill the project,
The
yeah.
lack of transparency.
Well, what was interesting was Deepwater Wind initially said, we cannot go to the next steps until we get either definitive rights to go onshore at Wainscott, or know definitively that we have to go out in Heather Hills Park. And that went on for months, where they said, we have to choose one because it's too expensive to go with both. Turned out, surprisingly, after all the council people were told that, and maybe part of the reason they voted to go forward, turned out that Deepwater Wind, not having gotten consent from both the town council people and the trustees, went forward on both tracks, which is, a logical thing for a company to do, not put all its eggs in one basket. But, again, it's the kind of thing that, fool me once,
Right.
you win, fool me twice, fool me 3 or 4 times, shame on me.
But what this all points to is a greater problem, that we need more transparency in our energy
Yeah.
companies. I mean, LIPA or whatever the
PSE&G,
PSE&G,
yeah.
whatever they're called today, should be telling us what they're doing, and that's the state. I mean, the state should be doing a better job of letting us know what's happening with the public utilities. And you can look at the similar offshore wind project off Block Island, and the state of Massachusetts and the state of Rhode Island forced them to be transparent.
Yeah.
And why we're not doing the same thing in New York, that's really what troubles me here.
Well, it's funny because, GGG got involved. We had a seminar or 2 public forums on the Deepwater Wind. And at first, we thought erroneously that it was Deepwater Wind that did not want to make public any of the economic details. But we found, surprisingly, it was LIPA and PSE&G that was the real stumbling block. And they're responsible to the state, and the state has sort of put their hands over their eyes. Because
That's what I was saying.
And do whatever you want, guys. And what it translates to, obviously, is higher energy bills eventually for the people here. Some of the people here have talked about setting up local utilities, essentially, where people have solar panels on their houses, and they form their own microgrid and things like that. Is that something you're familiar with? Have you worked with that at all?
I haven't drilled down to that level. I have solar panels on my house.
Oh, okay.
I'm also running for Congress and way too busy to figure out the economics of my personal solar power panels. I have not had high energy bills this summer. I think the reason was
that you were out in the street
I was
knocking
out
on doors.
on the street knocking on doors, or maybe because I have solar panels that are bringing more power in.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that happened, I guess, during this last year that a lot of folks didn't realize was happening is if you put the solar panels on your house 2 or 3 years ago, you have a meter that goes both ways. So you pay, pick a number, 10 cents a kilowatt to PSE&G when you use it, and you sell it back to them at 10 cents. PSE&G changed that. So now if you buy from them, it's 10 cents. If you sell to them, it's 2 cents. So that, it makes it more unattractive for you to put the big expenditure in. Also, another local issue out here, of course, is Montauk and the Corps of Engineers textile bag project. And have you had a chance to think about or look at any of the issues related to how we can overcome? I mean, I've dealt in my legal career with the Corps of Engineers, and they're difficult to deal with, but they're also very responsive to congressional pressure. I mean, that's the reality of the world. And there doesn't seem to have been much congressional pressure put on them on this Montauk project, or for that matter, on the bigger project of New Jersey to Fire Island and so forth. And have you gotten into that at all, Perry?
A little bit. And the good thing I can say is that I am, if nothing else, I'm committed to listening and advocating. And part of running for office and being a congressman is passing policy. But another part of it is just advocating for your constituents.
Sure.
And I'm a resident of East Hampton, so I'm certainly not going to ignore the East End of Long Island. And I think we need to pay attention to what's going on and be able to hold groups like the Army Corps accountable. Now, having said that, I look at the project overall, and it's got its good elements to it. There's certain things that the intentions are going in the right way. But I think longer term, if we've got rising oceans and we put in a seawall, it's only going to work for so long, but if the ocean keeps rising.
Well, the ocean's going to keep, well, take it back. Some people think the oceans are going to keep rising. Other people, perhaps not on scientific knowledge, think it's going to get better, or not get worse.
I don't respect the other point of view on that. I'm generally someone who respects multiple points of view, but science is science. The world isn't flat, the world is round. There are not two sides to that. Global warming is global warming. The core temperature is going up, and the sea levels are rising because the polar ice cap is melting. And you can look at the polar ice cap, and it clearly is melting. So that's real. What I understand from science is that if we're concerned about the rising sea levels, we can't undo it, but at least we can slow the progression. And that's why renewable energy is so important. And that's frankly why this election is so important. If you really care about the rising sea level and the impact it's having on the East End, you need to lower our carbon use. You need to get us back into the Paris Climate Accord. You need to take the steps that our government had been pursuing going back to Richard Nixon. You're a registered Republican, as you said. Your Republican Party historically
It was a little different.
It fought against climate change. It fought to protect the environment.
It also fought against tariffs and against other things
The
like that,
problem we have today with this Republican Party is that it's not protecting the environment at all. It's sold out our environment for corporate interests. Even leads on Monday night, there was a Congressional Candidates Forum in Riverhead, sponsored by the League of Conservation Voters. And while Zeldin wouldn't appear on the stage with me, I went in, I answered questions, I left, he went in, and he answered questions. And one of the final questions was, has the Trump administration been good or bad for the environment? And Zeldin admitted the environment is suffering from the Trump administration. And it's nice to say that, but that's really serious. If you live on the East End, likely you're here because you appreciate the beauty. It's a special place here. That's why I've moved here full time. I enjoy this environment, and the last thing I want is to see our country destroy it to put extra dollars into some corporate hands.
No, that's been a real problem out here because, as you say, the environment is what we're all here for: clean water, clean air, and when you erode that, it takes a long time to clean that up again. As we found out here, the other issue out here, I think that is somewhat affected by national policies is transportation. And you know, we have a situation where most people who are normal people and work in East Hampton can't afford to live here, and they have to travel back and forth. And that's well, you yourself said it, that in the winter you think nothing of going to Southampton. In the summer, you think that's like going to a foreign country. And it seems to me that the national transportation policies out here have been non-existent.
I think you're right. I make this statement a lot. We just took $1.5 trillion from the federal coffers and sent it to a corporate tax cut that went to corporations and the most wealthy people in America. And in doing so, we put an increased burden on New Yorkers by capping our SALT, our property tax deductions. And you can attack the tax cut, you can like it, but instead of spending that $1.5 trillion on a tax cut, we could have invested it in infrastructure. We could have used the money to build sewers and protect our water in areas of the district, to improve transportation. There's no reason we shouldn't have more track and electric trains coming out to the East End and the North Fork too. It puts Suffolk County at a huge competitive advantage for business.
Disadvantage, right?
Disadvantage for business everywhere, not just on the East End, because the cost of transportation is too high. The failure to have good enough communications infrastructure is another one. Everyone is going to laugh, but why don't we use infrastructure dollars to have more cell phone towers? And these new fifth-generation towers are small, low profile, not in my backyard, shouldn't be the same kind of issue. But let's invest in that. Let's encourage our companies, private enterprise, to open more or erect more cell towers.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways that federal government can get involved with that to stimulate it. And I really thank you for taking the time to spend another half hour with us. And
time goes fast.
Time goes fast, and I know yours is precious, especially at this time of the election cycle. So thanks again, Perry.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you to the viewers.
Okay.